In the year 330 AD, as the Roman Empire trembled under the weight of barbarian invasions, internal corruption, and economic collapse, a visionary emperor named Constantine the Great made a decision that would echo through a millennium. He looked eastward, toward the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, perched on the shimmering straits where Europe meets Asia, and saw not just a city, but the future of civilization itself. Here, on this strategic crossroads between continents, Constantine would forge a new Rome, a Rome that would endure long after the western half of the empire crumbled into dust and darkness. The old Byzantium had existed for nearly 1,000 years before Constantine arrived, founded by Greek colonists in 657 BC. It was a city blessed by geography, protected by the sea on three sides, commanding the vital Bosphorus Strait that connected the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. But Constantine saw beyond its ancient walls. He envisioned a capital that would rival Rome itself, a beacon of Christianity in an empire still finding its spiritual identity, and a fortress that could withstand the storms gathering on every horizon. With imperial determination, he transformed the modest city into Constantinople, the city of Constantine, adorning it with magnificent churches, grand palaces, a vast hippodrome for chariot races, and forums lined with columns that pierced the sky. The dedication ceremony on May 11, 330 AD, lasted 40 days, a spectacle of both pagan tradition and Christian ritual, symbolizing the empire's transformation from old gods to new faith. But Constantine did more than build a city. He divided the administration of the Roman Empire between east and west, creating two imperial courts, two senates, two centers of power. The division was meant to be administrative, a practical solution to governing an empire too vast for one man to control. Yet in this practical decision lay the seeds of something far greater and more enduring than anyone could have imagined. The Eastern Roman Empire, as it was initially known, would develop its own character, its own identity, blending Roman law and administration with Greek culture and Christian theology in ways that would define European and Middle Eastern civilization for centuries to come. When Constantine died in 337 AD, his sons divided the empire among themselves, but the unity he had forged quickly fractured. Constantius too emerged victorious from the civil wars that followed, ruling the East with an iron fist while Christianity continued its inexorable spread through every level of society. The Emperor Julian, who briefly reigned from 361 to 363, attempted to reverse the Christian tide and restore the old pagan religions, earning himself the epithet the apostate from Christian chroniclers who would write the history. But Julian's campaign ended in the deserts of Persia, where he fell in battle against the Sassanid Empire, Rome's ancient enemy in the east. His death marked the final failure of paganism to reclaim the Roman world. Christianity had won, and the Eastern Empire would become its greatest champion. The 4th century witnessed the final, irreversible split between the Christian East and the pagan-turned-Christian West. While Rome struggled against Germanic tribes flooding across its frontiers, Constantinople grew stronger, richer, more secure. The Emperor Theodosius I, who ruled from 379 to 395, made Christianity the official state religion and banned pagan practices throughout the empire. When he died, he divided the realm between his two sons. Arcadius received the east, Honorius the west. This division, meant to be temporary, became permanent. The two halves of the Roman world would never reunite. The West, battered by endless invasions, would collapse within a century. The East would endure for more than 1,000 years. In the early 5th century, as Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 and Vandals ravaged North Africa, Constantinople stood firm behind its massive walls. The city's defenses were a marvel of engineering. The Theodosian walls, completed in 413 under Emperor Theodosius II, stretched for over 5 kilometers, featuring triple walls, moats, and 96 towers. These fortifications would prove nearly impregnable for 1,000 years, turning back Persians, Avars, Arabs, and countless others who dreamed of conquering the Queen of Cities. Behind these walls, a distinct Byzantine civilization was taking shape, one that would preserve classical learning, codify Roman law, and spread Orthodox Christianity across Eastern Europe and beyond. The reign of Emperor Justinian I, from 527 to 565, represented the Byzantine Empire's first golden age and perhaps its most ambitious era. Justinian was born a peasant in what is now North Macedonia, rising through the ranks until his uncle, Emperor Justin I, named him heir. When Justinian took the throne, he dreamed of nothing less than the restoration of the full Roman Empire, the reconquest of the lost western provinces from the barbarian kingdoms that had carved them up. He was aided in this vision by his remarkable wife Theodora, a former actress who became one of history's most influential empresses, advising her husband on matters of state, championing the rights of women, and, during the Nika riots of 532, convincing Justinian to stand firm when he was ready to flee the capital. Her courage saved his throne and allowed him to pursue his grand ambitions. Justinian's reign began with the suppression of those very Nika riots, a week-long uprising that nearly destroyed Constantinople and cost tens of thousands of lives. The riots erupted from the chariot racing factions, the Blues and Greens, whose rivalry transcended sport and encompassed political, religious, and class tensions. When Justinian's forces, led by the generals Belisarius and Narses, finally crushed the revolt, half the city lay in ruins. But from these ashes, Justinian built his masterpiece, the Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom. Completed in just 5 years, by 537, the Hagia Sophia stood as the largest cathedral in the world, its massive dome seeming to float on beams of light, its interior glittering with gold mosaics and marble from every corner of the empire. When Justinian first entered the completed church, legend says he whispered, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." For nearly 1,000 years, it would remain the architectural wonder of the Christian world. But Justinian's true legacy extended far beyond architecture. He commissioned the greatest legal scholars of his age to compile and organize 1,000 years of Roman law into a single coherent system, the Corpus Juris Civilis, or body of civil law. This monumental work, completed between 529 and 534, included the Codex Justinianus, the Digest, the Institutes, and later the novels. It preserved and systematized Roman legal tradition, establishing principles of justice, property rights, and civil administration that would influence legal systems across Europe and beyond for centuries to come. Even today, the civil law systems of much of the world trace their roots to Justinian's codification. With his legal and architectural achievements secured, Justinian turned to his greatest ambition, military reconquest. He dispatched his brilliant general Belisarius westward with an army to reclaim the lost territories. In 533, Belisarius landed in North Africa and within a year had crushed the Vandal kingdom, returning the region to imperial control. The conquest seemed almost miraculous in its speed and completeness. Emboldened by this success, Justinian ordered Belisarius to Italy to destroy the Ostrogothic kingdom that ruled the peninsula. The Gothic Wars that followed would last 20 years, from 535 to 554, devastating the Italian countryside and depopulating cities that had stood since ancient times. But ultimately, Byzantine forces prevailed, and Rome itself returned to imperial rule. Though it was now a shadow of its former glory, its population reduced from hundreds of thousands to perhaps 30,000 souls huddled among ruins and empty monuments. Justinian's forces also reclaimed parts of southern Spain from the Visigoths, pushing Byzantine borders to their greatest extent since the fall of the West. For a brief, shining moment, the Mediterranean was once again a Roman lake, and Justinian could claim to rule an empire that stretched from the Atlantic to the Persian frontier, from the Danube to the deserts of North Africa. Yet these conquests came at an enormous cost. The constant warfare drained the treasury, depopulated the countryside, and left the empire vulnerable to new threats gathering on its frontiers. During Justinian's reign, catastrophe struck from an unexpected quarter. In 541, a plague arrived from Egypt, spreading through the empire with terrifying speed. The plague of Justinian, likely an early outbreak of bubonic plague, killed millions across the Mediterranean world. Constantinople alone may have lost half its population. The emperor himself fell ill but survived, while the disease returned in waves over the following decades, further weakening the empire's demographic and economic foundations. The grand vision of reconquest became increasingly difficult to sustain as villages emptied, fields lay fallow, and armies struggled to find recruits. When Justinian died in 565, He left an empire territorially impressive but financially exhausted and demographically devastated. His successors would struggle to maintain his conquests against mounting pressures. The Lombards invaded Italy in 568, quickly overrunning much of the peninsula and reducing Byzantine holdings to isolated pockets around Ravenna, Rome, Naples, and southern Italy. In the Balkans, Slavic tribes poured across the Danube, settling in regions that had been Roman for centuries, fundamentally changing the ethnic and cultural landscape of the peninsula. The empire was being squeezed from all sides, its resources stretched to breaking point. Yet the greatest threat came from the east. The Sassanid Persian Empire, Rome's ancient rival, launched a series of devastating wars that would push the Byzantine Empire to the brink of extinction. Under Emperor Maurice, who ruled from 582 to 602, the Byzantines managed to hold their own, even assisting a Persian prince named Khosrow II in regaining his throne. But when Maurice was murdered in a military coup by an officer named Phocas, Khosrow used this as a pretext for revenge. The Byzantine-Sassanid War that followed, lasting from 602 to 628, nearly destroyed both empires and changed the course of world history. Persian armies swept through Byzantine territories with terrifying efficiency. They conquered Syria in 613, taking Damascus and then pressing toward Jerusalem. In 614, they captured the Holy City, sacking churches, massacring Christians, and, most traumatically for Christendom, carrying away the true cross, the relic believed to be the actual cross on which Christ was crucified. For Byzantine Christians, this was more than a military defeat. It was a spiritual catastrophe, a sign that God had abandoned them. The Persians continued their advance into Egypt, the empire's breadbasket, capturing Alexandria in 619. Byzantine Asia Minor fell under Persian occupation. By 626, Persian armies stood at Chalcedon, directly across the Bosphorus from Constantinople itself, while their allies, the Avars, besieged the city from the European side. Constantinople had never faced such mortal danger. The Emperor Heraclius, who had overthrown the tyrant Phocas in 610, seriously considered abandoning the capital and fleeing to Carthage in North Africa. But the Patriarch Sergius convinced him to stay and defend the city, even melting down church treasures to pay for the defense. The siege of 626 was a desperate affair, with the city's survival hanging by a thread. But the legendary walls held. Byzantine ships controlled the waterways, preventing coordination between the Persian and Avar forces, and after sustained attacks, the besiegers withdrew in defeat. Constantinople had survived, but the empire seemed finished, stripped of its richest provinces, its armies defeated, its treasury empty. Yet from this nadir came one of history's most remarkable reversals of fortune. Rather than accept defeat, Heraclius transformed himself from an embattled defensive emperor into a warrior hero in the classical mold. Between 622 and 628, he led his armies deep into Persian territory in a series of brilliant campaigns that turned the tide of the war. He bypassed the main Persian armies in the Levant, struck into the heart of the Sassanid Empire through the Caucasus, defeated Persian forces in battle after battle, and finally threatened the Persian capital of Ctesiphon itself. The Persian king Khosrow II was overthrown and murdered by his own nobles, who sued for peace. The true cross was returned to Jerusalem in triumph, and all conquered territories were restored to Byzantine control. Heraclius returned to Constantinople as the savior of the empire, the hero who had defeated Persia after centuries of conflict. But the war had left both empires exhausted, their armies depleted, their populations devastated, their economies in ruins. Neither the Byzantines nor the Persians could have imagined that their long struggle had opened the door for a new power that would sweep away the ancient order entirely. In the deserts of Arabia, a prophet named Muhammad had been preaching a new monotheistic faith, Islam. By the time of his death in 632, he had united the Arab tribes under the banner of this new religion. His successors, the Rashidun caliphs, would unleash these united Arab forces in a wave of conquest that would reshape the entire Middle East and Mediterranean world. Part 1 finished. Part 2 on its way.